Welcome to episode 8 of our COVID-19 Religion and Belief webinar series. Today we have an exceptional panel of European Special Envoys for freedom of religion or belief. Let me show you the great lineup we have. The group will be chaired by Jan Figel, former European Commission Special Envoy for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief. Most of you have received their bios, but I will leave it to Dr. Figel to introduce them during the webinar. You should see a poll right now starting and appearing on your screen. We invite you to respond, to give you and our speakers also an idea of our global audience. So thank you very much in advance. For your information, this webinar is being recorded and live streamed on social media. The recording will be available on our series landing page, where we also publish information about upcoming episodes, and you will see the link in the chat. You can type your questions or upvote others at any time, and we invite you to do so using the Q&A tool on the bottom of your page. Please keep your text short and to the point. That will make it easier for the moderators to pass them on. If you get disconnected, just use the link you have received upon registration to join back in. Finally, I would like to recognize the sponsoring institutions of this webinar series: the Cambridge Institute on Religion and International Studies, the Center for Religious Studies at Bruno Kessler Foundation, the Center for Justice and Society at Fundação Getúlio Vargas Law School of Rio de Janeiro, the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at Brigham Young University Law School, the European Union Office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the University of Siena. I will now introduce Dr. Figel and broadcast the results of the live poll. Dr. Figel is the former Special Envoy for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief outside the European Union from 2016 and 2019. He was nominated by the European Commission, and again is the first Special Envoy of the European, appointed by the European Union. Formerly European Commissioner for Education, Training and Culture, Dr. Figel has also held other positions, such as State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and was the chief negotiator for Slovakia's accession into the EU. More than that, Dr. Figel's contribution to as Special Envoy has been incredible, and we really are honored to have him today as the chair of this panel. So I will leave Dr. Figel the time is yours, and thank you again for being with us.
Thank you, Francesco, not only for nice words, but also for our cooperation in Brussels and in Europe in general. I'm very glad that a group of 6 important organizers is successfully working on a series of COVID-19 different stories or episodes of webinars. It's important to use technology for the sake of humanity, especially in this more difficult time. And with 4 speakers, I had the pleasure to cooperate and especially to reflect the importance of European engagement in promotion of freedom of religion or belief last time in October during 2-day stock-taking conference at the end of my mandate. And I must say that I very much appreciate their openness, their professionality, and their commitment. So of course we will continue now in reflection, but what is more important is our joint action. Shortly, we will have some time for several lines of reflection and then for questions and answers. If I may start a bit, freedom of religion or belief is really very central human right, and its visibility and importance was underlined by tragic events in the neighborhood of Europe during the dominance of Islamic State of terrorists in Iraq and in Syria. It started in 2014, and until 2017, thousands of people have been either killed or displaced or simply suffered persecution, which was very brutal. At that time, many countries reacted very properly, including European Commission led by President Juncker. And I want to say that in 2016, when the first ever mandate for promotion of freedom of religion or belief was set in the European Union, it was followed by decisions in countries like Denmark, Hungary, Poland, Italy, United Kingdom, Germany, Estonia, Lithuania, recently Czech Republic. And now we have really quite many national representatives dealing specifically with promotion of freedom of religion or belief for all, or interreligious dialogue and interrelated intercultural issues. It's very good, but of course we need to deliver, we need to do more. So I would invite 4 speakers to discuss, first of all, the current state of the art of the missions of Special Envoys and the role of envoys in time of Corona crisis, especially because this is when we will devote more time or energy to the future of this institutional setup and policy and cooperation after crisis, how COVID will impact FoRB as a policy in Europe and internationally. So if I may start, and as we like to say, and we love to prefer ladies first. So I would now introduce shortly Emanuela Del Re, who is the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in Italy, in Rome. She is an Italian scholar and a sociologist. She was working in the areas of conflict resolution, migration, refugees, and also in areas of transition in some regions of the world. She was one of the key speakers at the October event, and I like her very committed approach to this situation in the world. And of course, I want to say at the beginning of our reflections that we pay tribute to all victims and express condolences to so many victims and families in Italy, but also in other countries who suffer the impact of Corona crisis. So with this openness and willingness, I would like now to hand over floor to Emanuela Del Re for her reflection. Emanuela, prego.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now it's okay.
So hello, thank you very much, Jan, for your presentation. I also appreciated very much the event in October, very stimulating and, of course, much needed because we need to continue discussing these issues today. And I can also say that, of course, this COVID-19 event, this crisis that is affecting so many countries, in my country in particular, but I would say, not only in my country, of course, I think is raising some issues that are going to be fundamental also for the future. I think that the decisions we are going to take now regarding certain specific issues are decisions that will stay with us for a long time, and therefore we have to be very careful. We have to, on one hand, prevent excessive reactions, on the other, preserve the population, on the other, again, of course, take decisions that can also be usable in terms of prevention of further pandemic, and also be ready to respond on all aspects, from the social aspect to the economic aspect to the obviously religious aspect in the future. I can say that I've been following closely the discussion on COVID-19 and religion in general, practice, and also religious freedom, because this has raised a number of important questions. For instance, what kind of hierarchy do we want to give to, or priority we want to give to the reactions that a government should have regarding religious freedom, or in particular the health emergency, and therefore the need to protect the health of citizens. There has been a lively discussion, not only in Italy, of course, but in the world, within various religious groups. And I can say that I've followed closely, for instance, the discussion within the Muslims, but also, of course, within the Catholics in Rome, as well as in other domains, also the Protestants, because this has been quite a problem. You know that at the beginning there was also an accusation to some particular churches to have contributed to the propagation of the pandemic, not respecting the rules imposed by governments. At the same time, of course, they have been called to react to the demands of the population of having the normal course of religious practices, but at the same time not wanting to risk anything at the level of health, and therefore not wanting to attend, for instance, for the Catholics, the Mass in churches. Such problems have been quite a big issue, not to mention pilgrimages, for instance, that have been stopped, not to mention what happened during Ramadan. And not only, consider that, just to take the case of Italy, in Italy we have around 8,000 municipalities, between very small villages to big towns, and each one of them, if not even the neighborhoods within the towns, have their religious festival, which is celebrated every year, and it's the most important, utmost, let's say, level of social cohesion. So you can imagine how complex this has been. Regarding the discussion within the communities, I have followed it closely, and I can tell you that there has been, I think, positively, a discussion on what kind of future we are going to build in terms of religious practices, for instance. What is valuable in terms of participation? For instance, Pope Francis decided to celebrate the Mass on the television every day at 7 o'clock instead of doing it in its own Vatican territory, because people were missing the Mass in the morning. They couldn't go to their local church, and therefore Pope Francis decided to, let's say, overcome this problem. Nevertheless, of course, the discussion has been, for instance, amongst many. Can I continue, or hello?
Yes, you can continue, but please focus on the situation. Future will be discussed afterwards.
Okay. So the situation is that, for instance, as regards the reaction, the reaction has been such that, for instance, a specific protocol has been signed between the different religious communities present in Italy, and this has been a huge advancement, because many religious communities have been, let's say, participating for the first time, I think, together in this kind of exercise. Many of their, let's say, specificity have been recognized, because of course, when you are talking about Jewish communities, Protestant communities, Orthodox community, Hindu community, Islamic community, and others, and the Church of the Saints of the knows it very well. Of course, you have to take into consideration the different approaches, the different terminology, for instance, and all the different aspects that are taken under consideration, usually by the communities themselves, but rarely in a group of different approaches. For instance, what has been very important in this protocol that has been signed by the Ministry of Interiors together with the communities is the fact that it has, let's say, the communities have been put together according to a sense of family, of a religious family, in a sense that they are, let's say, of course, similar, and they present similar features because they belong to this family of religious approaches. And I think that this is something that has been raised very, very clearly. Regarding religious freedom, as I said, of course, in Italy, we have religious freedom. And there is an article in the Constitution, of course, Article 19, that, of course, determines the freedom. At the same time, there have been discussions whether the article of the Constitution that protects religious freedom can be somehow shadowed by the article that protects the health, because the two, of course, in this particular case, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, were clashing in a sense. Then the spiritual need, and at the same time, the need to face the situation in terms of social distancing, as it is called, although I find it physical distancing rather than social distancing, and also, of course, the lockdown. So this is in general what has been happening in general in Italy. Of course, the situation is, you say that we are going to talk about the future later. Okay, I will not talk about it, but I think it's also very important to take into account the different voices that have been raised within the communities. For instance, a large number of youngsters, especially among the priests, but also in the Muslim community, have made the more traditional approaches of the elders, or the more let's say customary way of approaching religion, have been called to by the youngsters to reflect on the fact that nowadays there are alternative ways, and that maybe that they should be included in the liturgy, they should be included in the daily practices. I think that this is a discussion that should go on, because certainly this lockdown has not only been a tragedy, but has also been, as I said, a revolution in terms of psychological, philosophical, theological approach to the issue. I myself participated in an iftar dinner online, which I found as emotionally involving as the ones that I've done with friends in other situations, because it was very intense. And I can tell you that these formulas, these ideas should be taken into account, and they are taken into account, especially as regards this new approach also by the institutions that takes measures to respond to the different demands of the single communities, but at the same time considers the actual need for religious expression, for religious practice, a common practice to all. This is quite an advancement, I find, and for the moment I stop here. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Emanuela. You are fully right saying that impact of COVID will stay with us for a longer time. We will reflect it further. And also all the limits on the freedom of religion or belief must be, of course, based on law. They must be provided with legitimacy and proportionality. We have a good combination of countries represented today, bigger and smaller, older and newer members of the European Union. So now I move further to the north, to Poland, to give floor to Daria Wolosiuk, who is the Special Envoy of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Saputowicz, in Poland. And she's also dealing with the United Nations agenda and human rights. Daria, if I may ask you, floor is yours now.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mr. Figel, and good afternoon to you all. Let me start maybe first by saying 2 words about the special envoys and their position. Actually, despite the fact that different countries and different ministries has, different models of special envoys, I believe that we share quite same mission. And there's a lot of similarities when it comes to areas of focus. And it is to monitor the situation around the world, to present recommendations to the ministry, to raise awareness, and to represent this topic in international fora. And in case of Poland, I would like to underline another important task, which is to coordinate the issue in the ministry. Because in our opinion, it is important that the FoRB is mainstreamed to the activities and initiatives of all other departments, that it does not rely on one person. And if there is the interest in this issue, how Poland wants to achieve it, what we are doing to achieve it, to mainstream this topic in the ministry, I would gladly elaborate it. So, even before the COVID-19, Poland was deeply concerned about the situation with FoRB, about the increase of intolerance, discrimination, and violence. And actually, these concerns stood behind the initiative of establishment of my position. But not only. Also, let me mention just the initiative to establish the International Day to commemorate the victims of violence based on religion or belief, which is commemorated on 22nd of August. With COVID-19 pandemic, the situation is even worse. I mean, there's more social tensions, more intolerance, hate speech, and conflicts. And actually, my mission did not change in this respect. It just includes or take into consideration now the context and this new challenge of COVID-19 pandemic. And Poland, takes actions on the political and humanitarian level. And in case of political actions, it is both multilateral fora, including international organizations and other formats of intergovernmental cooperation, like, for example, Religious Freedom Alliance, and bilateral, and with cooperation. But with bilateral, I have to say that with COVID-19, it is a little bit more difficult to act because diplomacy relies a lot on in-person contacts and in-person, interactions. And especially when you want to raise delicate or difficult issues, it is quite necessary to have it this in-person exchange, and under present circumstances, this is quite limited nowadays. And with humanitarian, I would like to underline two aspects: that it is important to cooperate with faith-based organizations, which have quite good knowledge of the local communities, of their needs. And on the other hand, it is important to assure that this humanitarian aid is reaching religious minorities, which often are neglected during the humanitarian assistance distribution. And we can see, and it was already mentioned, how COVID-19 impacts the FoRB. And on the one hand, as it was said, there are limitations and restrictions on FoRB. But let me underline, it's not restrictions to FoRB itself as the right to have, to change, to choose your religion or opinions. These are restrictions to, some practices, religious practices and manifestations. And as you said, Mr. Figel, there are certain conditions under international law, like, these measures need to be necessary, proportionate, temporary, and not discriminatory. And there are international mechanisms that monitor if countries, if states, fulfill their obligations under international law. On the other hand, I already said about it, there's this increase of intolerance and social tensions and, religious minorities, and we can see episodes of this around the world. Religious minorities are blamed for the crisis. And this is another important and impact of COVID-19. And for example, Poland, if you ask us what we do about our activities, we, for example, issued the call to release prisoners of conscience during the time of COVID. And I do have some remarks on the future, but if I understood correctly, this topic will be raised a little bit later in our discussions. Am I right?
Yes,
because,
yes.
So I will stop here unless there are some questions to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Daria, and especially thanks Polish diplomacy for this first ever commemoration day within the United Nations on the victims of religiously motivated violence, August 22nd. It will certainly help to raise awareness on the importance of this agenda and some actions for future. Now I would like to give floor to Michael Suhr, who since 2018 is leading a role or who has taken role of special representative for freedom of religion or belief within the Danish diplomacy after Ambassador Michael Melvin. I think it's a very important contribution, not only in Danish perspective, but also in European cooperation, because he's very experienced also from the EU agenda. So without further loss of time, Michael, please take your time, take your floor. You must unmute, yes. Unmute your mic. Yeah.
It's unmute now, right?
Yes, now.
Thank you so much, Jan, and it's so great to see you again, alive and well, all of you. Let me just echo what Daria just has been saying, some of that, I won't repeat it. Just make 3 points of what has been particular for our attention, my attention during the pandemic. First of all, it has been from the distance with our embassies and also through NGOs to monitor what's really happening on the ground. How bad is the situation? How many countries, how many religious groups are misusing the pandemic as a pretext or under the cover to imprison certain religious leaders or faith-based organization leaders and so forth. And that has been quite tricky, but we have been getting quite some good data on it, and on that basis speaking up or trying to speak up as well as we could bilaterally against such situations. Allow me to mention just a case in Nigeria where you have the leader of the national atheist organization being imprisoned suddenly without any charges in the beginning. And through the help of other colleagues, we've managed to at least bring this attention on the case, and we hope that will have a positive effect. But so there is this role of monitor and speak up, and also to use our platforms in the European Union to raise the awareness or raise the concern, encourage others and the European Union to do the same. So that's the second role, I would say, that we've been trying to take care of. Thirdly, it's also on the basis of that information to have a regular dialogue with our faith-based organizations and faith-based actors in Denmark about the issues and their problems, because many of these organizations actually do a fantastic work in different countries, especially in Africa, providing health services or related services to what have been as terrible issues for people related to the crisis. And so some claim that these faith-based organizations provide up to, in some African countries, 40% of the health services in a broad sense of the word. So they have a particular role. Of course, they have been affected by the crisis as well, but some of them have stayed back, as they often do during crises, doing a fantastic work. So they provide, of course, much needed services, and our role in that respect have been, of course, besides encouragement, also to discuss and make sure internally in the ministry that they will be continued to be financed, because some of them also lost a lot of money because they are normally NGOs, partly self-financed through selling, old clothes and so forth. And all that, of course, is not possible, has been possible during crisis. So they have been in financial troubles. And we simply couldn't see that happening, because that would, first of all, destroy their future, but also it will destroy their possibility to operate in some of the most poor and vulnerable regions and countries in the world. So we've done quite an effort in that respect to make sure that activities could continue. I would just at this stage just stop, or perhaps as a concluding remark, say we didn't experience nationally big difficulties with the various religious communities and their services. They've been quite imaginative in the way of also alternatively providing services on the net, playing some music out of the windows of churches and so forth. So there's been a great backup to the government's approach to handling the crisis nationally. Yeah, and I'll stop there so you get some time for questions and the two other questions you want us to address, the future role and how we see the impact for FoRB in the future. Thank you very much, Jan.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, also for your point on COVID bringing kind of coverage or pretext for some actions which are more or less hidden against prisoners of conscience, which also Daria Voloshuk mentioned, and in terms also of interventions or territorial gains by ISIS in some countries, or imprisonment of people in Nigeria. There is also a question from Marcela Szymanski just on this matter, like ISIS progressing in Burkina, in Nigeria, and Mozambique. And of course, that we should do something. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Tristan Asbey, who plays a very special role in the Hungarian policy towards protection of persecuted Christians and other minorities in Middle East and Africa, in Southeast Asia. So Tristan is in his position since 2017. He replaced Tamás Török and is quite visible and active in his field. So now I give the floor to Tristan.
Thank you for the introduction, also for the opportunity. It's always good to see all the longtime friends and allies in the defense of freedom of religion and belief at these gatherings, even though now it's a virtual one. But usually when I speak to a crowd, I have to explain my position because it's a rather unique one. So my full title is State Secretary for the Aid of Persecuted Christians and for the Hungary Helps program. That might sound a little bit curious. So let me explain what this position covers. First of all, I'm in charge of the usual general duties of a special envoy for FoRB. So we, as a government, take part in any international initiative to support international freedom of religion and belief. We use the diplomatic fora, we use the human rights fora, we use our diplomacy, and also we contribute to the joint or common foreign service and foreign policies of the European Union. Why it's not called the Special Envoys Office, but why it was elevated to the ranks of a state secretariat is that in the Hungarian government, the tasks of a special envoy is coupled with a humanitarian program. So basically the more important part of my position and mission is to run Hungary's international humanitarian aid program, in which we set one of the key priorities, the support of persecuted Christian and other persecuted religious communities or belief groups. The next question usually is why separate Christians and why not support other groups? So to clarify that, we do support other persecuted religious communities. For example, we support persecuted Muslim Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. We also have large-scale multi-euro aid programs for the persecuted ethno-religious group of the Yazidi in Iraq. But we mentioned, or we are explicit about supporting persecuted Christians because when it comes to the absolute numbers, Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. 4 out of every 5 person in the world who are persecuted for their faith or religion are Christians. Therefore, our support for them is non-exclusive, but it is explicit. We want to try to get a message out to the general world and to the general public opinion that the lives of Christians is just as important and should be defended. Their human rights should be defended with just as much commitment than for any other minority groups. So this is why we have started a FoRB focused humanitarian program 2.5 years ago. We are active in the Middle East, also in Africa, and in the last couple of years, the number of our direct beneficiaries has exceeded 70,000 people. Now, returning to the question, how do we see the current situation? The situation of FoRB in relation of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think we all observed the fact, and we can all say that the coronavirus pandemic has worsened the situation of those religious and belief groups that have already been discriminated or targeted. It has worsened the situation of their right for freedom of religion and beliefs in many ways. First of all, the defense against coronavirus has distracted the attention of the world, understandably. And while the world is being distracted, many oppressive governments, authorities, regimes, but also terrorist groups are using this lack of attention to advance their extremist agendas on the expense of the persecuted or discriminated religious groups. I'm talking about both social discrimination, but as it was just mentioned before, they are also using to gain ground. We are also receiving reports through our monitoring network about the expansion of ISIS and other jihadist organizations on Africa, but there are also other countries in Central Asia where there is an anti-Muslim sentiment, and now it's strengthening as the world is in general distracted. Also, there are authorities, governments, and other charity organizations who are discriminating against religious minorities when it comes to the distribution of relief. There are also many instances. I'm not going to use this opportunity to finger point on certain countries, but there are many reports on countries excluding members of religious and belief minorities from the healthcare system, which of course has a very critical and deadly effect on these communities. There is also, and I'm moving towards the extremist religious organizations and tendencies. There are many reports on a certain representatives of a majority religious group on scapegoating on the religious minorities, interpreting the coronavirus as like a divine punishment for the presence of people belonging to another faith or people of other belief groups, such as atheist people. This is, and this is going always. I heard about Christians being blamed to be the source of the coronavirus, but also heard about minority Muslims being blamed as a punishment for COVID-19. And since we are not only focusing on FoRB as a human right, but also on humanitarian aid, I would like to touch upon the issue of a very large-scale so-called secondary humanitarian crisis stemming from the coronavirus. And that's usually because of the measures what the government introduced because of the coronavirus, such as curfews or lockdowns, which enables, which causes that those minority groups, for example, religious minority groups, who are economically discriminated and financially and economically more vulnerable, they are pushing them in a terrible condition. There are many countries in the world where, for example, Christians or other minorities, they are not allowed to be employed. So usually members of these communities, I'm talking about Central Asia and also in many countries in Africa, they can only earn their bread from a daily basis on basically on the black work market. They are not allowed to have jobs. So now that there are curfews, lockdowns, we are receiving reports in an extensively alarming rate of hunger and famine. We are receiving heartbreaking reports on people dying of hunger from Pakistan all the way to Burkina Faso. And once again, there are no channels of humanitarian aid directly to these minority organizations. Referring back to what Special Envoy Woloszczuk just said, we think and we believe that humanitarian aid should more focus more on the persecuted or discriminated religious groups, and this aid has to be direct to these communities with the involvement of faith-based organizations. This is what we implement in our aid policy, and this is what we want to inspire other governments to follow suit. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan. And I must underline what you stressed, sort of secondary humanitarian crisis. There is a new notion, maybe you heard about, called COVID, which means hunger and COVID. I think that we need to do something to organize kind of force or platform of those who can and would like to help in different regions where the problems are the most striking. And for that purpose, I'd like to organize the second round, which can be combination of not only a basic topic which we announced, the future of Special Envoys and future of our cooperation in this agenda, because there is also a new initiative started in February called International Religious Freedom Alliance. Today it is represented by 29 countries, which is a growing number, but I want to stress that half or more than half of these countries are European countries, most of them EU members or EU candidates. So there is a logical political need for better coherence, coordination, and impact of our policies for the sake of those who suffer around, and the numbers are huge. It's about millions of people. And there are also many questions already in Q&A list. I just want to say some of them or express some of them and ask now panelists to respond to this general question of future of our cooperation, coordination in Europe and internationally, but also to reflect, for example, on points like from Anna Sineva, how governments could improve ways to support interfaith dialogue among minorities. Jack Hardy, how can New Zealand and Australia better advocate in the region, both on the level of civil society and government? Catalin Raju, Romania, how to get into position of Special Envoy in this important country. I think it's really good idea for Romania to join. Fergus Obera, best greetings to him. How European countries could coordinate, because there are many now with Special Envoys, and that maybe he says it is a point on agenda for incoming German presidency. Faruk Aftab, how to better coordinate and get impact of Special Envoys. Wael Aleji, how to cooperate between European countries and International Religious Freedom Alliance. Fabio Petito on Special Envoy of European Union renewal. And there are some other questions maybe at the end. I want to say that for the sake of European Union, its internal issue to decide. But I think that it's important that EU, with its institutions, Commission, External Action Service, European Parliament, is in the forefront of this cooperation and helps to coordinate attitudes and potentials of member states. I will try to help current administration to take proper decision, which was not made. But I think even questions here and messages from different countries say we should work together. So, but now I would like, in the reverse order, give the floor to reflect about the future of Special Envoys and cooperation, coordination, plus Q&As to Tristan Asbey first.
Okay, thank you again. I think when it comes to the human rights advocacy part of the mission of the FoRB Special Envoys, this requires diplomatic leverage. Now, me serving as a government representative of a relatively small country, although it's a mid-sized country in the European Union, I face the realities that as the representative of the Hungarian government, I lack the diplomatic capacity to successfully negotiate with faraway countries' governments on the better protection and support for FoRB in their areas. So this is why I believe that setting up networks of special envoys for FoRB is key and essential to actually achieve diplomatic support and then preservation and defense for this very specific human rights. This is why we were very pleased to hear about the formation of the International Religious Freedom Alliance. It has been already mentioned. It was established or founded in Washington, D.C. I think there are, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are more than 20 countries who have joined this alliance. I'm proud to say that Hungary was the first European government to join this alliance, because this is where we can reach the critical mass in terms of diplomatic power to express support to those governments where there is a positive steps in terms of FoRB, or negotiate, or in the worst case, apply diplomatic pressure on those countries where FoRB is violated. So this is a good initiative. We were glad to join. Something that is our initiative is to set up a humanitarian aid task force or platform within this alliance to couple the diplomatic and human rights advocacy efforts with actual humanitarian aid policy. Now, turning to European Union, I greatly commend the other European Union member states' decisions, one after each other, to establish the positions of special envoys. I have received the question that Hungary, why hasn't Hungary established a similar position? We just elevated to the state secretariat level. And I'm hoping that all of the European member states would appoint such government officials. And I'm very much looking for better coordination between the member states' government representatives. And also I'm looking very much forward to the extension or even promotion and elevation of the European Union's special envoy that was, of course, formally held and fulfilled by Jan Figel here. So we support all this, and we call upon all European Union's member states to coordinate with each other.
Thank you, Tristan. I just want to add that my country, Slovakia, with the new government, decided to establish position of the governmental plenipotentiary for the promotion of religious freedom internationally. So this is also good signal in the same direction. Now, Michael Suhr, if you can reflect on future and cooperation. Denmark is observer in the alliance, so this is also special maybe point to comment. You must tune in. Michael.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you for the opportunity to reflect on the future. It's true, we are observers in the International Alliance, and we've chosen to be that because we still have some issues we want to have resolved before joining, such as also stressing in the title that it's all belief. The Danish government, in our strategy on promoting freedom of religion or belief, has been, as far as we understand from the Humanist International, the first one to have all the belief or the non-believers as a key priority in our strategy. And thus it's a key concern for us also to have it reflected in the identity of the alliance. Secondly, we have a particular wish to ensure there is an emphasis on the interlinkage between FoRB and gender equality. That combination is one of the most difficult ones because many religions has been seen to suppress women's rights, not to enhance their rights. But we have a particular wish to emphasize the possibilities of using FoRB as a liberating tool for promoting women's rights as well. But those two concerns I hope that we can deal with in the near future, and then we'll see. As when it comes to Europe and the questions from Fabio Petito and from Fergus Obara, yeah, we do promote the idea of a continuation of the function of Jan's Figel. Jan did a really great job. And as you said, Jan, most of the members of the International Alliance are European countries. We need Europe to be in the forefront of this, especially during the pandemic, the crisis we've seen. There has been an overall general tendencies of the suppression of the rights of the individual, also the FoRB as a right, to the benefit of the collective rights. That has to be, of course, reversed as we go out of the pandemic to make sure that some of the autocratic regimes do not keep some of these repressive tools in place. And we need Europe to spearhead that. Thus, we need the continuation of the function. We need a European counterpart to the former Senator Brownback. Europe have a fantastic possibility to play a significant role and to determine what's the content of promoting FoRB. If we do it together, we are far away from doing that. And when I look at the European construction, you know, the ideal would be a person who could have a leg in each camp, one in the European Action Service and one in the development aid cooperation, as my Hungarian colleague was just saying. I mean, one thing is to do the advocacy, the diplomacy part, but the other part is also to promote the humanitarian side. If you have the money and some of the other means, as Jan has been stressing with Pakistan, the trade instruments, to use those, you're much better off in your advocacy job. So yes, we are arguing for this within the European Union, and we hope that together with others, we'll be successful in this endeavor. When it comes to what we can do, and the question of Marcela Szymanski, sub-Saharan situation and difficulties, we are trying to help, and I know some of the other European countries are doing a job in pushing back ISIS. We have situations where it's not just a national problem in Burkina Faso or Mali, it's following equator, so to speak. And pushing back means using different means. Denmark is supporting with military means as well, together with others. But we need to also work with the people on the ground. We have a support for a regional Sahel non-governmental faith-based organization support mechanism, support for that, for those groups to push back on some of what is happening. I think we can look with some inspiration to what was done in Cameroon. There you had an initiative by the Christian church leaders working together with the minority group, the Muslim groups, working together to create a better understanding of why was it that they've been living so well together for years, and what was the threat coming. In their situation, it was Boko Haram attempting to cross the border and make a negative spillover of what they've been successful doing in the north of Nigeria to some extent. But that's an example. Even in countries where you have a long tradition of coexistence, respect for each other, majority, minority groups, there they need to be more conscious about why is it that they have been living so well together. And by cooperating, they can actually do an effort to also promote a stronger defense against the intruding ISIS forces or local versions of the ISIS forces. Turning to the question of Anna Shineva, how do we interact with faith-based organizations, faith-based actors? And how can we do that in the future, perhaps a little bit differently? I think one of the ways where we can make a slight change is going back to not necessarily treating faith-based organizations and actors as secular organizations. There's been that tendency. When I say that, it's because we have to recognize that faith-based organizations, faith organizations have a unique possibility of transmitting messages and spreading the good work of cooperation or respect, protection of others. That means we have to accept that sometimes it's good to use the mosque or the church as a platform for transmission of messages, or the imam or the priest, the rabbi, that person is the one to interact with in order to get a better understanding of how to deal with respect to the intruding ISIS forces in various countries. I hope that answers some of the questions. What I would like to say in more general terms is that there's been this tendency, why FoRB? Why not some of the other rights? Well, we've dealt with a lot of the other rights. We have to accept that FoRB has been the forgotten right. It has been the right which, in the beginning, certain religions didn't want on the table. Let's face it, the Catholic Church in the beginning didn't like the right. That has changed. Now it's sort of reversed. Those we are seeing, those who promote FoRB as actually sort of the avant-garde of bringing back in religion in foreign policy or in international politics, rather than what it really is we're doing, promoting a right for the individual primarily. And that is a very liberating way of looking at it. And I think that our role in the future is to correct the imbalance. This right has been mistreated. It has been the underdog. Now we need to, face it as it is. And I think especially when it comes, in international relations, we always have new fashions. One of the new terms, which is very much used, is the shrinking civil society space. That space is shrinking. It's a real problem. But there is a tendency in some quarters, that when you speak of that shrinking space, you speak of the right to freedom of expression or right to assembly. You don't take into the equation the freedom of thought. And think about it for a second. What is free speech without free thought? So we need thought to be in the equation. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking the time so long.
Yeah, Michael, thank you very much. I will now go straight to Daria for her final reflection, including Q&A, and then to Emanuela. Daria?
Thank you very much, Mr. Figel. I will be brief. When it comes to the future of special envoys, I hope the number of the special envoys will increase actually, as well as coordination between us. And it includes also the EU special envoy. We hope there will be continuation of this position, because actually, as Poland, we were quite inspired by this position when we established, similar one in our ministry. Your activities, Mr. Figel, were quite also the argument or element in favor of establishing this position. So we hope that it will be even continued and strengthened. And in this context, I would like fully subscribe to what Ambassador Sur said about combination or combining, this political and humanitarian element, which may increase the effectiveness definitely of this position. And what would be desirable when it comes to special envoys? Maybe it would be to have more regular, on contacts on more regular basis, as it is the case with Religious Freedom Alliance. Because thanks to the exchange of information, of experiences, of initiatives, we can really combine our strengths and cooperate on ad hoc basis in different at different levels and in different cases. And I hope that what I said also responds to the question about advocacy or improving advocacy on FoRB. It was really important question how to do that. And I would say that coordination and joining the strengths or the coordination and cooperation among countries may be one of the elements to do that. And as a final remark, just let me say one more thing, that it is a little bit too early for stock taking, for example, how COVID-19 impacts FoRB or how it will change FoRB. But my preliminary views or conclusions are at present is that the COVID-19 crisis just confirmed that how important are religious actors. And we saw, a lot of, for example, responses from religious leaders and their call for solidarity and against discrimination and, intolerance. And this positive potential of religious leaders to support our governmental, strategies is something that we should take into consideration. And the same goes with the faith-based organizations, which outreach during the crisis to vulnerable communities or vulnerable groups within their communities. And also it is really really important that we strengthen the cooperation with faith-based organizations, as it was also mentioned by Ambassador Sur. So thank you.
Dzięki bardzo, Daria. Thank you very much. I want to add that Poland announced early this year that it's ready to organize the third ministerial of the Religious Freedom Alliance after two ministerial summits in Washington. So it's also important news from Poland. And now, bel paese, finalmente, if I may ask Emanuela to reflect on current and future trends, decisions, and some Q&As from the list. Emanuela.
Thank you, Jan. I have to say that so much has been said, actually, and there is no time really to reply to all the issues that have been raised, which actually show how complex and rich also the issue that we are talking today about is obviously showing. I can tell you a few things regarding some of the issues that have been raised. Regarding the Special Envoy, I do believe that it is important to have a European Special Envoy. And I think that because, for instance, Italy is a European country, we strongly believe in European institutions. And I think that the coordination that a Special Envoy at European level could provide is very important, as it has been the case in the past, of course. Of course, I say this also because one thing that has emerged from the current situation and that projects us in the future is the need to harmonize our protocols, especially for religions in general. It is true, religious actors have emerged as absolutely fundamental. I have explained what happened in Italy, for instance, but more than being fundamental actors, I would say that they are being more accredited in a sense, also to the public opinion for all the issues that were described, discrimination, accusation of being the cause of events, or also within Europe, of course. And being accredited in a different way, I think, is the best achievement that we are experiencing today. And I think it is absolutely fundamental. Of course, Italy, as I mentioned, I mean, religious freedom is guaranteed by the Constitution, but the actual technicalities, the juridical and constitutional technicalities that emerged, I think have helped to accredit the approach of the single communities all together, which is also another huge achievement, thinking about a group of religious communities which are all equal. And of course, Italy doesn't make any distinction between minorities, for instance. We consider all of them equal, and we, in case of persecutions, of course, our criterion is vulnerability, certainly not what kind of religion they belong to. And this is very important for us because this is a tradition, and of course we want to continue in this sense. I also want to tell you that some of the practices that have shown how important it is to cooperate between religions and the institutions, and I'm talking about this because I'm a member of the government at the moment, I can say that, for instance, in the practice which was started actually by Italy, and we are trying to transform it into a European practice of the humanitarian corridors, it's so beautiful to see the evangelic churches cooperating with the Buddhist, with the Caritas, with the Episcopal Conference of Italy, I think, and of course, with the cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Interior, without which, of course, these practices couldn't be put in place because all the bureaucracy, the documents, the certifications, and all the, of course, the leverage that we have from the past of having to certify everything couldn't be solved. So in general, what I want to say is that yes, we need to reflect more on FoRB, although, as I said, for some countries it's concluded. But for instance, in this moment, there is, I think, a very rich sense of, let's say, building the future within the European Commission and Europe in general. For instance, I participate in many meetings in which we discuss the future, especially as regards COVID. We discuss development cooperation. We discuss how to help fragile countries, which is an important mantra at the moment. When you were talking about hunger, I thank you, because, for instance, Italy recently launched a food coalition to avoid famine, because that is a danger. And just to give you an example, I've also seen, of course, my counterparts in Poland, in Hungary, and everywhere, of course, in Europe, are participating in these meetings. The very interesting thing is that there is a common sentiment, in a sense, the awareness of having to solve our own problems within the European Union, and therefore make sure that all the actors are respected, all the actors are given the opportunity to play their role, also, of course, with religious representatives, but also the idea that what happens within Europe is a reflection of what happens at global level, especially in fragile countries. So this is, I think, a moment in which we can really take advantage from a very flexible mentality that I am also witnessing in the European Union, the openness to add to the rest of the world, the fact that we are talking about Team Europe, which is a beautiful way of describing Europe, of course. And this, I think, is something that allows us also to see beyond the future, in the sense that we are really aware of the fact that we are given the opportunity now to lay the basis from a different way of looking at the world. I think in this sense, the global response to COVID is not just an exercise. It's not just a way of obviously tackling the huge problem of the pandemic. It is a way of thinking of a world which is more equal. Another thing that Italy is doing is really advocating for the Alliance for the Vaccine, for instance, which is a way of saying we need to be equal. We need to make sure that from now on we think that one is one, meaning one person is equal to any other person. And this means that if we follow this rule, if we think in an equitable way, and I'm glad that somebody also mentioned gender equality, of course, in which Italy is always on the forefront. I think that this is the opportunity for the future, giving more voice, more accreditation to some stakeholders, having a multi-stakeholder approach, an holistic approach, and especially this view of the world as equal. I think it's not easy, but I think that we have gone through phases in which there was always an hierarchy, between the North and the South, the East and the West, and all the rest. At the moment, I think we have to think global. Thank you.
Grazie molto, Emanuela. I want to say deep thanks on behalf of multiple audience, people from academia, from civil society, from governmental structures who listened and followed this webinar, especially to 4 very competent panelists. I want to say that pandemics or epidemics have been with humanity in the history multiple times, but we need to learn and we need to get out of the crisis, not into deeper crisis. And the road towards solution, towards vision is combination of common sense and dignity for all. We are all equal in dignity. We are all different in identity. And European Union can play very special, even pivotal role in this learning from the past, bringing its legacy and also its commitment for future, which starts today. And the answer is in combination of 3 C's: communication, cooperation, and coordination. With all this in mind, I invite you to keep on, to combine communication, coordination, and cooperation in the future on national state levels, but also on European level, and with friends from the other side of Atlantic or globally, because they were represented at today's webinar, we can make 21st century more humane time. And that's the major noble vision and objective. Thank you all, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to the participants and for being with us today. If it was a possibility to clap hands from all over the world and make those claps arrive to your computers, I'm sure that we would hear plenty of them. So again, it has been a very interesting discussion, and I would like to thank again all of you for being with us. I'm happy to announce our next 2 webinars. We have next week, registration on a landing page will open soon, maybe already tomorrow, for episode 9. On June 4th, we will have a webinar focusing on Asia, and we will be pleased to hear a distinguished panel of experts from India, Indonesia, and Singapore. We're also happy to share that episode 10 on 11th of June will be in partnership with the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and will focus on COVID-19, freedom of religion or belief, and gender. We will be joined by Dr. Hakme Shahid, the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, and by members of the OSCE ODIHR panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief. Although we cannot see you, again, we appreciate your support throughout the series, and we look forward to welcoming you next Thursday. Have a wonderful day, and thank you all.
Thank you all. Bye.